What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Monday, March 15th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have an 8-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the point guard position. I like Chris Paul from the Phoenix Suns playing the Memphis Grizzlies, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Chris Paul has averaged 36.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. He scored 38, 34, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 31, and 21 minutes. He's projected at 36.2 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's 5.3 times value because he's only $6,800 FanDuel salary, but he is $1,000 more on DraftKings, so I like that FanDuel price. Now he scored 26, 33, 41, 53, and 36 fantasy points versus the Memphis Grizzlies in his last 5 games. So 4 out of those 5 games, he would have been hitting value on FanDuel, and 3 out of those 4, he would have been hitting value on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 228 points scored in this game, so I like Chris Paul here versus the Memphis Grizzlies. Okay, another point guard that I like is Drew Holiday from the Milwaukee Bucks playing the Washington Wizards, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Drew Holiday has averaged 33.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He scored 38, 24, and 27 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 25, and 22 minutes. He's projected at 29.3 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's 5 times value because he's $5,800 FanDuel salary, but he's $700 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price, but I think he's still playable over there on DraftKings. I think he can still hit value. He'll need about 34 fantasy points to hit 5 times value or more on DraftKings. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks there's going to be 239 points scored in this game. And Drew Holiday has scored 38, 43, 48, 38, and 18 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Washington Wizards. So excellent player versus team history there. It's a fantastic matchup. So I like Drew Holiday here versus the Washington Wizards. Okay, another point guard that I like is Derek White from the San Antonio Spurs playing the Detroit Pistons, who have the 12th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing point guards, Derek White has averaged 24.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 24 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He scored 45, 18, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 25, 25, and 27 minutes. He's projected at 25.5 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's $5,300 FanDuel salary and 100 less on DraftKings. Now he's scored 13, 18, 37, and 25 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Detroit Pistons. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 219.5 points scored in this game. I prefer this as a tournament play because this guy can definitely kill your lineup, getting you 10, 15 fantasy points, or he can explode like he did yesterday for 45 fantasy points. So it's kind of a boom or bust pick here. So I like Derek White as a tournament play here versus the Detroit Pistons. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. Wow, what a value play we have on FanDuel. This guy is a lock for me on FanDuel. Just have to check the news and make sure he's going to be playing. Not going to take the game off, but I don't think so. It's not a back-to-back. He should be playing just like he did last game. So I like Caris LeVert from the Indiana Pacers playing the Denver Nuggets, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing shooting guards. But Caris LeVert has averaged 34.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 28 minutes per game with a 32% usage rate. He came back last game and he scored 20 fantasy points in 26 minutes. Now, his projection is a little bit high here because he's probably not going to get 28 minutes. He'll probably play around 26 minutes, but that's not too far off from his season average. So he is projected at 33.5 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 8.2 times value on FanDuel because he's only $4,100 FanDuel salary. He's $2,900 more on DraftKings. So this looks like a pricing mistake on FanDuel. Definitely a lock for me at shooting guard. He's got plenty of upside. He's going to be playing plenty of minutes. This guy should easily hit value, 5 times value or more on FanDuel. Now, I don't know if I'm going to go there on DraftKings quite yet. They've got his price up there. So I like Caris LeVert on FanDuel here versus the Denver Nuggets.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching. If you want to enter the drawing for $100 PayPal, all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won, and then we'll send you $100 PayPal. So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Andrew Wiggins from the Golden State Warriors playing the LA Lakers, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing shooting guards. But Andrew Wiggins has averaged 29.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He scored 41, 25, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 37, 28, and 31 minutes. He's projected at 29 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. He's $5,600 FanDuel salary and $300 more on DraftKings. Now, he scored 9, 26, 45, and 23 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Lakers. So not amazing player versus team history, but you can see he's got some upside. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 222.5 points scored in this game. I think his salary is pretty reasonable considering he can score you 40 fantasy points or more here and crush value. So I like Andrew Wiggins here versus the LA Lakers. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Emmanuel Quickley from the New York Knicks playing the Brooklyn Nets, who have the 10th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing shooting guards, Emmanuel Quickley has averaged 20.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 19 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 36 fantasy points last game, and he played 33 minutes. He's projected at 22 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's $4,600 FanDuel salary and $1,000 more on DraftKings. Probably a FanDuel value play for me, a tournament play, but I do like this play here. He scored 28 fantasy points in his last game versus the Brooklyn Nets, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 225 points scored in this game. So I like Emmanuel Quickley on FanDuel here versus the Brooklyn Nets. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. This guy's another hit or miss play. I like Mikal Bridges from the Phoenix Suns playing the Memphis Grizzlies, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Mikal Bridges has averaged 27.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He scored 18, 31, 14, 32, and 31 fantasy points in his last 5 games, and he played 31, 39, and 27 fantasy points in his last 3 games. I just wanted to go back 5 games there so you can see that he really is hit or miss. He'll get you between 15 and 30 plus fantasy points, so it just depends on what Mikal Bridges shows up to play basketball that night. But he is projected at 27.1 fantasy points here tonight, which is his season average, and that's 5.4 times value. He's 5,000 FanDuel salary and 300 more on DraftKings. So I think that price is pretty reasonable on both sites. The other reason I like this pick is because he scored 33, 35, 26, and 34 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Grizzlies. So he's got pretty good player versus team history here. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 228 points scored in this game. So I like Mikal Bridges here versus the Memphis Grizzlies. Okay, another small forward that I like is Doug McDermott from the Indiana Pacers playing the Denver Nuggets, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Doug McDermott has averaged 20.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He scored 33, 21, and 35 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 26, 29, and 29 minutes. He's projected at 20.4 fantasy points here tonight. On FanDuel, that's 5.1 times value. He's only 4,000 FanDuel salary, but he's 800 more on DraftKings, and he scored 35, 29, 5, 15, and 5 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Denver Nuggets. This is definitely a tournament play, probably a FanDuel tournament play only, but I think he does make a pretty nice value play on FanDuel. So I like Doug McDermott here versus the Denver Nuggets. Okay, another small forward that I like is Harrison Barnes from the Sacramento Kings playing the Charlotte Hornets, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Harrison Barnes has averaged 30.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 24, 35, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 39, 31, and 37 minutes. He's projected at 31.6 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 6,300 FanDuel salary and 300 more on DraftKings. So I like this pick because Vegas thinks there's going to be 239.5 points scored in this game. It's a fantastic matchup, and he scored 41, 19, 40, 14, and 29 fantasy points in the last 5 games versus the Hornets. So I like Harrison Barnes here versus the Charlotte Hornets. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Jeremiah Grant from the Detroit Pistons playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Jeremiah Grant has averaged 37.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 29 and 47 fantasy points the last 2 games, playing 35 and 33 minutes. He's projected at 36.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 7,300 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. So Jeremiah Grant has scored 31, 18, 21, 27, and 47 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Spurs. Vegas thinks there's going to be 219.5 points scored in this game. So I like Jeremiah Grant here versus the San Antonio Spurs.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, another power forward that I like. I got a stud here for you. I like Julius Randle from the New York Knicks playing the Brooklyn Nets, who have the 10th worst defense overall, and they give up the 13th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Julius Randle has averaged 44.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 37 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 61, 24, and 57 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 39, 28, and 42 minutes. He's projected at 43.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's 9,200 FanDuel salary and 600 more on DraftKings. Now, he scored 50, 39, 44, 29, and 27 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Nets. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 225 points scored in this game. So I like Julius Randle here versus the Brooklyn Nets. Okay, here's a value play for you. I like Isaiah Stewart from the Detroit Pistons playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing power forwards. Isaiah Stewart, he scored 33, 23, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 19, 22, and 20 minutes. Oh, so he's averaged 17.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 19 minutes per game with a 13% usage rate. But he had a 20% usage rate last game, and he's projected at 19.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.7 times value. He's 4,100 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. So I think he's a reasonable salary on both sites. He would get you 5 times value, or he would get you over 5 times value if he can score 25 fantasy points, which I think he can do here tonight. So I like Isaiah Stewart here versus the San Antonio Spurs. Okay, moving on to the center position. I like Cody Zeller from the Charlotte Hornets playing the Sacramento Kings, who have the absolute worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing centers. Cody Zeller has averaged 24.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 24 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 24 and 25 fantasy points the last 2 games, playing 22 and 26 minutes. He's projected at 25.5 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.9 times value. He's only 4,300 FanDuel salary and 600 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. DraftKings price, it's okay, but I prefer him on FanDuel. Another reason I like this pick is because he scored 39 and 35 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Kings. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 239.5 points scored in this game. It's a fantastic matchup. I think he makes a really safe FanDuel play. So I like Cody Zeller here versus the Sacramento Kings. Okay, another center that I like is DeAndre Jordan from the Brooklyn Nets playing the New York Knicks, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing centers. DeAndre Jordan has averaged 22.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 23 minutes per game with a 13% usage rate. He scored 31, 14, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 29, 26, and 28 minutes. He's projected at 24.5 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. He's 4,600 FanDuel salary and 700 more on DraftKings. So he scored 32, 15, 16, and 22 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Knicks. Not great player versus team history, but he did score 32 fantasy points versus the Knicks last game. So we'll see what he can do here. It's a pretty good matchup versus the center position, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 225 points scored in this game. So I like DeAndre Jordan here versus the New York Knicks. Okay, another center that I like is Richaun Holmes from the Sacramento Kings playing the Charlotte Hornets, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing centers. Richaun Holmes has averaged 31.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He scored 36, 39, and 41 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35, 34, and 30 minutes. He's projected at 32.9 fantasy points here tonight, which is right around 5 times value on FanDuel, and even a little bit better on DraftKings because he's 6,700 FanDuel salary, and for once, he's 300 less on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. He scored 33, 34, and 42 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Hornets. I think this makes a really nice DraftKings play. He's fine on FanDuel as well. He's playing a bunch of minutes. He's been productive. He's playing well. It's a great matchup. High scoring game. So I like Richaun Holmes here versus the Charlotte Hornets.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.